Hello and welcome back to Media Snack, live from New York.
Greetings from London.
So this is a big one. We've talked about in-housing a few times over the years on Media Snack, and we wanted to just kind of give a bit of an update on that. And we're thinking a lot of advertisers have started to explore the idea of in-housing. And actually, I'll come on just to tell you why we don't call it in-housing even, and there's problems even in the terminology that's being used. But increasingly, advertisers are thinking about this. It's being asked of the media director, right? We hear many times from media directors that their CEO or CMO or CFO is like, when are we in-housing media? That seems to be the thing, the big question that sits with media directors frequently. What it really means is about what capabilities, what elements of the media function and what capabilities are you going to think about building internally over time, and why should you or why might you not do that? Because you don't have to do that. There's a good case for not doing it. And many very high-profile media directors are very anti the idea of doing this and say that you should rely more on your agencies. So let's kind of explore an up-to-date view of in-housing, and if you're going to do that, like, where do you start and how do you think about it? And the main thing is this is a question of resource and capabilities, and so that's really what we're going to focus on. And David, you're going to give us 3 tips of how to start to structure out that decision, because it's a strategic decision that you have to make as a media director, and you have to own that and develop that strategy and get buy-in from your stakeholders. So we'll explore all of that on today's Media Snack coming up. Welcome to Media Snack, the live weekly show where we unpack the important questions that you will have about media, agencies, marketing, and more. If you're new to the channel, it's great to have you join us. Subscribe below to get alerts of all upcoming weekly episodes. Okay, so big one.
Yes.
Let's just get into it. What is the question of the week?
So where do you start in-housing media?
Okay, so first off, I'm going to say that's a terrible term, in-housing. And we try not to use it because it always suggests in-housing is that somehow you're taking something from the agency and just putting it inside, and therefore it's this kind of zero-sum game, and the agency somehow loses out, and then you just take it over. But actually, it's more nuanced than that. Yeah. And we really try to frame it in the idea of just capability building. And for a CMO, they just want to know that they've got the right capabilities, whether those are internal or external, to manage the media function, which is increasingly complicated, as we keep saying. And so you want to have a long-term view of the capabilities and resources that you need to manage media most effectively to drive those business outcomes to maximize value. So if you think about it as just building resources and capabilities and then deciding where it should best fit, it's a better thing than saying in-housing, because it sounds like you're taking something away from the agency. It's not always true. You might be complementing each other. Lots of research around this that's been going on in the last few years, and pretty much all point to a trend that this behavior is increasing and is predicted to increase further. Why? Well, because agencies can. It's become advertisers can. It's becoming easier to do that. It's becoming easier to start to build media capabilities within marketing organizations, and a lot of that is fueled by the access to data and technology that's really allowing the advertiser to take on some of those functions that maybe traditionally they outsource to an agency. Yeah, it's an opportunity as well. Advertisers see the opportunities that there may be some improvements, performance improvements. Are there cost improvements? Some people have suggested that in-housing media saves you money. Our view is that that's the wrong motivation to do it. Don't do it to save money, because it will typically backfire and you'll never save as much as you think you're going to save. There's lots of additional liabilities and costs that come with in-housing these things. And maybe perhaps another driver, we've heard from some advertisers that they attempted to explore in-housing perhaps as a reflection of decaying trust in their agency. Now, we're not saying that as a wholesale, but there, over the last decade, there have been questions on trust and transparency of agencies. Some of those have been dealt with. Some people still believe that there are issues there. And that could be another driver that's causing advertisers to think, actually, we'll just take a bit more control and get more visibility of this stuff. So where does it start? It really starts with the advertiser And the work that we do with advertisers, helping them understand strategies for in-housing or building capabilities, starts with a really simple question, which we call build or buy, which is just looking at the media function, everything that has to be done in order to activate media and get the best kind of bang for your buck, if you like. Breaking all of that down and then deciding which things most naturally are best suited to be done internally, and therefore which things should be done are best done by some kind of external partner, typically an agency. And that's the thing, it has to be based on a rationale of where that function should sit to be most effective. Again, it's not about taking scope from the agency. We do it from a ground up, with participation from knowledgeable stakeholders within the advertiser and often within the agency, to start to determine which things we want to build ourselves and which things need to be bought from external partners like agencies. So there's this build or buy design process, which is really interesting. And it relates to everything's on the table, right? Every part of media deployment, as I said, in-housing, there's a lot of discussion on in-housing. I think Mark Pritchard famously called it hands on keyboards. And so we all kind of jumped to that conclusion that it was all about, activation and buying and the implementation. But there's a huge part of the media function and the process which sits obviously before that in data analytics, strategy planning, insight, all these kind of things. And typically those are the things which maybe are more suited to being built as capabilities internally, perhaps than the hands on the keyboards, although it depends on the advertiser. It has significant implications, of course, as the advertiser, because in building capabilities, you increase headcount and typically technology cost. And so that has to be paid for. So there needs to be a business case, a robust and rigorous business case for that migration or that expansion of capabilities. It's not something to be done on a whim, because you're talking about long-term investments in technology, and obviously investments in people are long-term investments typically, so and significant. So the business case is very important. So therefore, doing the build or buy analysis is a fundamental platform, we find, of building that business case. Really important. I want to come on to you, David, in a second, just to talk through some of the strategies that we advise, major considerations. I just thought while we're here, I'll touch on some of what the benefits and the risks, if you like, of in-housing, based on our experiences of what we've observed over the last decade, let's say, although obviously the trend has accelerated in the last 3 or 4 years. Some of the main benefits of building your own capabilities as an advertiser, and the main one really is the control that it gives you. Particularly those parts of the media function, more what we might call upstream, which is the the data, the insight, the strategy, the planning.
Yeah.
And having a bit more control of the decision making, instead of historically just delegating all of that off to the agency. You give them a budget, give them a brief, they come back with all the recommendations. As businesses become more data savvy and they get more information and quicker information about their business performance, they are tended to want to have more control and decision making closer to that information. And so that gives them, in many businesses, they find that in-house or internal media capabilities can be much more agile and react quicker to the market, which makes a lot of sense, because it's kind of removing that middleman stage of having to brief an agency.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses will not or cannot share very detailed marketplace like sales data. Sometimes they're contractually not allowed to share that externally with agencies. And so the agency is somewhat at a disadvantage because they don't often get that real-time data in order to be able to react. Whereas the advertiser, if you have your in-house operation, you can react to market data much quicker. Another benefit we see, you think it would be destructive to the agency relationship. And I think early on in the in-housing conversations, agencies were very resistant to the idea because they thought they were losing scope. But we found actually most agencies are now kind of very supportive and consultative on that. And they see that an advertiser building their own capabilities in media elevates their elevates their understanding and sophistication in media, and actually makes them a better partner with the agency. So there's actually, we see a lot more better collaboration sometimes when the advertiser has already invested in their internal operations a bit more on a par with the agency, and that can be a very good, strong partnership. So those are some of the benefits. There are potentially economic benefits and efficiencies. There's obviously effectiveness that might come from that greater agility and speed to market. But not paying agency overhead, being very much in control of having dedicated resource internally rather than buying fractional resource from the agency. There's obviously potential cost efficiencies in doing so, and potentially less dollars wasted through ineffective processes or dysfunction, whatever it might be. So the benefit case is pretty strong. It's a good one, but there are risks. As I said up front, it's not a cost-saving driver, right? So obviously you're taking on additional costs, you're taking on additional contracts, tech contracts, or sometimes vendor contracts, which require a lot of management. And agencies manage their resources pretty well. When you bring them internally within a marketing organization, maybe they're not managed and used in the most productive way. So it's not necessarily a straight cost saving on headcount or technology.
Yeah.
You're having to manage that talent. So this is a new skill often for the business. If you're a CPG business, you're used to hiring marketers. You're not necessarily used to managing, a kind of media agency internally. It's a whole new set of skills and HR and cultural challenges there. There can often be another risk is what our friend Belinda Smith calls organ rejection, which I think a few businesses have experienced, which is, you try and bring in particularly the kind of hands-on keyboards type stuff. You're bringing in, I've been rambling so much, my computer me out. You're bringing in, just say you're bringing in a whole bunch of programmatic buyers or social media buyers. They don't necessarily sit comfortably within a brand marketing organization. It's a bit oil and water, and culturally you have to kind of work on how you blend these teams together. How do you sit hands-on keyboard next to a brand manager? Normally there's quite a degree of separation there when it's external, but you bring it internally, that can create some friction. And the final kind of risk, often quoted by marketing and procurement, is that media is, the implementation of media is so incredibly complicated. Just the billing and reconciliation and the finances of all that back end stuff is incredibly hard. I've even had a couple of media leaders say, look, we'd in-house the lot if it wasn't for the complexities of the billing. And actually we rely on our agencies for the reconciliations and the processing of the buy, perhaps more than we do the strategy and the planning. So there's some big considerations. It cannot be wholesale. Our advice generally for the advertiser is, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not all or nothing.
Yeah.
The work that we do typically results in a roadmap of progress, and we would say to the CMO, here's what you're going to do now, then in the next year, and what should be done in maybe a year or two, just to manage expectations of the impact to the business and not create this organ rejection. It was a catastrophic place to kind of get to. So start with the pilot, start with a strategy, and start thinking really about what these critical decisions are going to be. So why not I stop there? Tell us then what's a good start point? How do we advise advertisers to start thinking about this process?
Yeah. And we've been doing a lot of this because, we're very lucky. We work with some of the most progressive advertisers in the world, and they're invariably asking this kind of question. So the kind of the tips I'm going to give you is actually the process that we go through when we're working with them.
Yeah.
And interestingly, we work with one advertiser that has in-housed a key component of their media for years. They were one of the earliest adopters of in-housing because they're so rich in their data. And actually, increasingly, what they've done recently is begun to outsource that again, because as you said, Tom, they just weren't able to keep in line with the investment required around technology. They felt that component of media was best serviced with actually agency partners rather than doing it internally. So it can work both ways.
Yeah.
But the process that we normally go through is a 3-stage process. The first is diagnostic. So we go in and we go and help organizations understand what their current media management process looks like, where their resource strengths are, where their capabilities are already fairly rich, and where they're actually weaker. And when they are rich in capability and in resource, how easy is that going to be to scale? Now, all of these questions in terms of the diagnostic are going to be based on a clear understanding of the direction of travel of that organization's media strategy. You're investing increasing more money into programmatic. Are you taking in data and analytics internally? How good are your contracts? Do you control all of your contracts internally? If so, then how do you begin to build on that? So that initial diagnostic is absolutely critical. Once you understand where you sit and where your direction of travel is, the next thing is around prioritizing, beginning to understand which areas of the media management process do you want to double down on, which areas are going to be easier to build capabilities internally, and which are going to be very, very difficult. What we find within this space, just to add a little bit of context and an outside perspective, is that we talk to other brands. So if you're an advertiser and you're beginning to go through this kind of process, at this stage, talk to other brands that either aspire to have aspirations of your type of in-housing solution, or that have gone on that journey. Begin to start getting some insights on the journey that they've been on, so that you can begin to infuse that within the next stage, which is the action plan. And the action plan is a clear roadmap, as you say, now, next, future, clear roadmap that will enable you to gradually begin to go on that kind of journey. And at that stage, our recommendation is to actually bring in the agencies, bring in your agency partners, and ask for their guidance and help in how to begin to incubate that idea and how they can help enable that strategy to happen at a quicker pace.
Yeah, very good. I was reminded as you were talking about, going back a couple of years when people started to worry that they weren't in-housing quick enough. Do you remember there was, I think we've moved on beyond that, so it feels like a distant memory. But the frequent question from the media director was the same, which was, "Oh, we're behind everybody else on this. Like everyone else is doing it, and we're not. And we don't know where to start." And there were some that rushed in and made some very significant wholesale changes, maybe on a bit of not a whim, but just on a hope. And it requires a bit of strategic thinking, and it requires some good aligned consensus amongst stakeholders, so you really know what you're doing, and you have to go through that process. Yeah. As we say, from the ground up, to really understand what's right for the business. So it doesn't take a long time, but it's an important process, and you can just bring all your stakeholders along with you and make kind of aligned decisions. Yeah, really good. Love that. We'll be doing more, I'm sure, on in-housing. Mm-hmm. We're finding actually as well, one thing I was going to add was that in running pitches as well, it's become, maybe going back a few years, the advertiser was slightly hesitant and embarrassed to say, well, at some point we might in-house some of our media. Yeah. Whereas now within the briefs that we're writing in some pitches, the advertiser is very confident, and we're encouraging them to be very confident about laying out their ambition. And we say very clearly to the agency, we have an ambition to build the capabilities internally in the following areas over time. Yeah. How are you going to help us do that? Exactly. Now, right. When we first started asking that question, going back a few years, agencies would be like, well, we're not going to help you in-house media, because that, again, it's positioned as a zero-sum game and they feel like they're losing something. But actually agencies now, as I said at the beginning, much more consultative and pragmatic about that. And we found a few, and then a few more, and now pretty much all agencies are willing to stand up and say, it's the right way to think about it, because you can and you want to. Some things do sit best internally, and we will be a good partner for you on that process.
Because it actually plays to their future goal as well, to be a more consultative, strategic partner. Perhaps moving away from the executional side, but actually become more strategic, become a business partner to those brands.
Yeah, well, it's definitely in-housing, whether you call it that or you call it something else. It's divided opinion. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got an opinion on it, and we'd love to hear yours. So if you have one, please leave a comment down below. Please subscribe to the channel, and please share this because it allows other people like you to find this channel, and we want to keep promoting this debate and better understanding of in-housing and some of the implications. But that is your media snack for this week. Thank you very much for watching.
See you next time.
Media Snack is brought to you each week by ID Comms, the award-winning growth consultancy specializing in media. We help advertisers on a life cycle to growth in 3 service areas: operations, partnerships, and optimization that transform your media investments into real company growth. Whether you're planning an agency pitch, upgrading your media organization, want to learn new best practice, or simply get better performance from your media investments, you can find out more at idcomms.com/growth.